It sounds unbelievable, but Vietnam is now raising billions of golden apple snails in closed farming systems. A species once seen as a nightmare for agriculture is now being reproduced as a valuable resource. Few people realize that this creature can wipe out an entire rice field in just one night. With its explosive reproduction rate, golden apple snails spread like living waves, destroying young rice seedlings and pushing much of Southeast Asia into repeated crop failures. Countries tried everything, spraying chemicals, mobilizing thousands of people to collect them by hand, and spending millions of dollars on large-scale control campaigns. But the more they tried to eliminate them, the faster the snails return, making control efforts almost meaningless. It became an invasive species that was nearly impossible to remove. So why, when the entire region struggled to stop them, did Vietnam choose to farm them instead? Is this a brilliant strategy or a risky gamble? Let's find out with Mandarin Tech. Originally from South America, the golden apple snail became a global agricultural nightmare within just a few decades. Unlike typical pests, it reproduces at an almost uncontrollable rate. A single adult female can lay 300 to more than 1,000 eggs at a time, and within 2 to 3 weeks, a new generation is ready to reproduce again. Under favorable conditions, their population can grow to tens of millions in just one rainy season. In the United States, especially Florida and Texas, golden apple snails have disrupted wetland ecosystems, reduced native aquatic vegetation, and forced environmental agencies to spend over $2 to $3 million each year on monitoring and control. But the most serious damage has occurred in Southeast Asia, where rice farming plays a critical role. What makes them especially destructive is how they attack. They don't eat mature leaves or fully developed plants. Instead, they target young rice seedlings, the most vulnerable stage of the crop. Once damaged at this stage, the plants cannot recover. Since being recorded in 1980, golden apple snails have destroyed more than 50,000 hectares of rice fields in the Philippines. In Thailand and Indonesia, rice yields in many areas dropped 10% to 40% per year, forcing farmers to replant multiple times in a single season. The impact spread beyond Southeast Asia. In Japan, China, and South Korea, farmers reported rice fields transplanted in the afternoon, turning into empty flooded plots just hours later. In southern China, damage during major outbreaks was estimated at over $1 billion per year. The moment bright pink egg clusters begin appearing along the edges of rice fields, many farmers know the battle with golden apple snails has started again. In many rice-growing regions, control measures are deployed almost immediately. Drones take off at dawn, spraying chemicals across fields covering hundreds of square kilometers, hoping to stop the invasion before it spreads to nearby areas. Countries have spent hundreds of millions of dollars on pesticides and large-scale control campaigns. In many places, farmers still go into the fields before sunrise, walking through cold mud to collect snails by hand and destroy egg clusters before they hatch into a new generation. In the Philippines, some farmers start at 4 a.m., yet by midday the fields can still be covered with snails, as if nothing had been removed. But the problem has never been a lack of effort. It lies in the way this species survives. Golden apple snails do not appear once and disappear. When one field is cleared, new eggs have already hatched somewhere else. When one area finally brings the outbreak under control, another population returns after the next rain. Over decades, the fight against golden apple snails has slowly become a familiar repeating cycle. And as this cycle continues, the cost is not only measured in lost rice production, it is also seen in fields becoming increasingly dependent on chemicals, and in agricultural ecosystems gradually losing the natural balance they once had. As one of the world's largest rice exporters, Vietnam could not stay out of this battle. By the late 1980s, when golden apple snails began spreading across the Mekong Delta, the region producing more than half of the country's rice, many provinces reported losses of $20 to $30 million per year. During peak outbreak years, farmers often had to replant 2 to 3 times in a single season, not because of drought or floods, but because a small species was reproducing faster than people could control. In many farming areas, a natural solution was introduced, releasing ducks into the fields. Hundreds, sometimes thousands of ducks were guided across newly planted paddies to eat young snails and their eggs. In suitable areas, this method helped significantly reduce snail populations without additional chemicals. But its effectiveness did not last on a large scale. Not every field could support duck grazing. Not every region could maintain flocks large enough to control outbreaks. And after each rainy season returned, the bright pink egg clusters kept appearing along the field edges. After decades of fighting a species that seemed impossible to eliminate from rice ecosystems, a bold idea began to emerge. What if the enemy of rice fields could actually become a resource to feed people instead? Taking action quickly, in several northern delta provinces such as Tai Binh, Nam Dinh, and Hung Yen, closed-system golden apple snail farms were rapidly established, turning a species once targeted for elimination into a livestock resource managed under a clearly controlled process. Inside these farming areas, rows of concrete tanks are arranged side by side, supported by aeration systems operating almost continuously. Water temperature is maintained between 25 and 30 degrees Celsius, allowing the snails to grow steadily nearly year-round instead of depending entirely on the natural rainy season. On the water surface, a thin layer of floating plants is added to provide shade, supply natural food, and help stabilize the environment for young snails during their early growth stage. Each tank can maintain densities of 10,000 to 30,000 individuals, making production efficiency far higher than under traditional field conditions. After only 2 to 4 months, a batch can already reach harvest size, much faster than most familiar livestock in traditional agricultural systems. While freshwater fish and poultry farming still depend heavily on land area and stable seasonal feed supplies, golden apple snails can feed directly on duckweed, leafy greens, and agricultural byproducts as their main food source. With high stocking density, low production costs, and a short growth cycle, these farms are beginning to operate like continuous biological food production systems, transforming a species once considered a pest into a new rural livelihood resource. No longer are the bright pink egg clusters crushed along the edges of rice fields the moment they appear, as they once were. Inside closed farming systems, they are now carefully collected and transferred to separate incubation areas, where temperature and humidity are kept stable to protect each new generation even before hatching. After just 10 to 15 days, the eggs begin to split open and hatch into young snails. Thanks to continuously controlled conditions, their survival rate becomes significantly higher than in the wild, where most eggs are usually washed away by rain or destroyed early in their development. For the first time, egg clusters that once signaled the start of a new outbreak are no longer treated as a warning sign. Instead, they have become the starting point of a controlled production cycle that farmers can maintain throughout the year. After several weeks of being raised in closed tank systems, the moment of harvesting golden apple snails finally arrives. There is no longer a need to bend over in muddy rice fields to collect them, one by one as before. Farmers simply drain the tanks, gather the snails into one corner, and harvest them in large batches. Thousands of snails quickly cluster into dense layers at the bottom and are lifted out with mesh baskets in a process that can be repeated almost every day. In just a few hours, a small farm can collect 30 to 50 kilograms of market-ready snails, sold at around $2.5 to $3 per kilogram, an amount that previously could take an entire day in the fields and still not be enough. Immediately after harvesting, the snails are moved to a central cleaning area. Here, each batch is poured onto long washing tables with continuously flowing water to remove mud from the shells. Workers stand along both sides of the sorting tables, mixing the snails by hand and removing impurities and undersized individuals. Large plastic baskets are constantly replaced in a steady collection rhythm. After several hours of washing and soaking, the snails are ready for transport, sale, or further processing. Fresh batches of golden apple snails are quickly moved to a cleaning area after harvesting, where they are soaked in water for several hours to to remove mud and remaining impurities from their shells. This is an important preparation step that helps make the snail meat clearer, firmer, and naturally sweeter before moving on to further processing. One of the simplest and most popular dishes is boiled snails with lemongrass and ginger. Fresh snails are dropped into pots of steaming boiling water, releasing a light spicy aroma. In many northern neighborhoods of Vietnam, a hot plate of boiled snails usually costs about $2 to $3, often served with a strong ginger chili dipping sauce. It has become a familiar afternoon snack in urban street food culture. A richer option is stir-fried snails with chili. After cleaning, the snails are quickly cooked over high heat with golden fried garlic and fresh sliced chili. As the fish sauce thickens around the shells, the spicy fragrance spreads rapidly, creating a dish that is both crispy and full of flavor, making it hard for diners to stop after the first bite. In many night markets, snails are also skewered and then steamed with lemongrass or grilled over charcoal. Rows of shiny golden snails cook over hot stoves, releasing a distinctive rich aroma. Within just a few minutes, they become a popular street food. Clear evidence that a species once known for damaging rice fields has now become a familiar local delicacy on everyday dining tables. But the value of golden apple snails does not stop at the dining table. A large portion of the harvest actually moves in another direction, into the livestock and aquaculture industry. After being crushed or ground, golden apple snails become a natural high-protein feed source for farmed fish, such as grass carp, tilapia, and snakehead fish. With a protein content of about 12 to 16%, snail meat helps fish grow faster during their early development stages and significantly reduces dependence on industrial fish meal, one of the most expensive ingredients in aquaculture today. In many fish farming models in the Mekong Delta, using locally available snails can reduce feed costs by 10 to 20% per production cycle. Golden apple snails are also widely used in poultry farming, especially for free-range chickens. When chopped or mixed directly into feed, the meat provides an easily digestible source of protein, while the calcium-rich shells help support bone development and improve egg quality. As a result, large commercial fish farms and poultry operations are beginning to form direct supply connections with snail farming facilities. These links are gradually creating a more integrated production chain where golden apple snails can be collected, processed, and reused efficiently within local farming systems. In this way, a species once considered a destructive agricultural pest is now becoming a new and valuable component of modern livestock production. For decades, golden apple snails were seen only as a species that needed to be controlled. But as more commercial farming models began to appear, a larger question started to emerge. What would happen if this biological resource were used on an industrial scale? Each year across Southeast Asia alone, millions of hectares of rice fields report the presence of golden apple snails. This means a massive amount of natural biomass already exists within agricultural systems, yet most of it still remains underused. At the same time, the global livestock and aquaculture industries are becoming increasingly dependent on imported fish meal and expensive industrial protein sources. As a result, developing locally available alternative feed materials is becoming a clear and growing trend. With their fast reproduction rate and short life cycle, golden apple snails are now being considered a promising raw material for future biological feed production systems. Several pilot models in Vietnam and China have already shown that collecting and farming snails under controlled conditions can create a stable year-round supply, instead of relying entirely on natural populations as before. When organized into a coordinated production chain, a species once known for causing serious crop losses could become part of a circular agricultural system, where what once damaged rice fields can return to support agricultural production itself. In this way, golden apple snails are gradually being redefined, not only as a pest to control, but as a resource with long-term potential in modern agricultural systems. This new approach is not limited to golden apple snails. It reflects a broader shift in modern agricultural thinking worldwide. For many years, invasive species were almost always seen as threats that needed to be eliminated as quickly as possible. But as control costs continue to rise and effectiveness declines, more countries are exploring a different strategy, turning these pests into usable resources. From crop-damaging insects raised as livestock feed to invasive seaweed harvested for biological fertilizers, new economic models are emerging based on the same idea. Rather than fighting nature, people are learning to work with what already exists in the ecosystem. In that context, the story of golden apple snails is no longer just a local solution used by farmers in a few Asian countries. It is becoming a clear example of a new direction for 21st century agriculture, where species once seen as problems can become part of the solution. Once a species that could make entire young rice fields disappear after just a few rainy nights, the golden apple snail is now becoming part of a production system humans can actively control. What changed was not the snail itself, but the way people chose to see it. After decades of control campaigns failed to deliver a lasting solution, a different path began to emerge, turning a pest into a resource. And sometimes the future of agriculture is not about eliminating what belongs to nature, but about learning how to turn those challenges into part of the solution. Like and follow Mandarin Tech for more incredible engineering and agriculture stories from around the world.